if you think Joe Burrow has the other tool in his toolkit that he was talking about this week during the press conferences, it's his mobility. He said to reporters that the first time that he squared off with the Ravens, he wasn't at full strength. He didn't have all of his devices at hand. So even though he's not a quote-unquote dual-threat quarterback, Joe Burrow is a little shifty. We've seen it in the postseason. We've already seen it this year, especially against good defenses, against the 49ers on the road. 6 rushes for 43 yards on the ground. So I think that's a solid play as well. Looking at Joe Burrow's rushing prop, set only at 12.5. I'll take the over there. It is a very low number. He's hit this in 2 of his last 3 games, has had at least 5 carries in all 3 of his last 3 games. So maybe he's not the most efficient runner, but in prime time, I feel like if there's a first down to be had, Joe Burrow is going to run the few extra yards.
I love that. I've been looking at that ever since you mentioned it in the first hour, Chelsa. And I love that you kind of got a tidbit from listening to him talk about how he just didn't have his complete set of skills ready to go, or he wasn't at 100% against the Ravens, because Joe Burrow is that guy who you don't think of him as a mobile quarterback, and he's not. He's certainly not Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts or anything like that, but he's also not a total statue in the pocket. He's slippery. That's what he is. Joey B is slippery. So if he needs to get some yards, he can, and now that he's healthier, by his own admission, I feel like this number is low. I'm a big fan of that pick. I like it a lot.
Yeah, the only sabotage factor for quarterback rushing props is like if they kneel at the end of the game, because this number is so low. But that's kind of why I like it too. At 12.5, it's really low. He can get this in 1 rush. If you look at his last few games, he has got this in 1 rush, like his longest rush, 17 yards last time around against the Texans and 20 yards on the ground against the Niners. So maybe that's the way to go. Are there any other players you like in this game, Jenks?
I do like my boy Gus. Oh,
the Gus
bus.
Edwards.
Toot, the toot. Gus bus. Toot, toot. Hop on the Gus bus. Woo! Let's go into the end zone with the Gus bus. We got Gus Edwards driving the bus, and he's going to take us in for 6. I like Gus Edwards. Over 46.5 rushing yards, -115, or anytime touchdown, -105. Take your pick here. So here's my case for over 46.5 rushing yards. Number 1, I mentioned that Cincinnati defense. Really bad against the run. Also, without at least one of their edge rushers on that defensive line. Gus Edwards has hit this number in 5 of his last 7 games. Back against the Bengals in week 2, rushed for 62 yards, even though he only had 10 carries. And then I also think if you're talking about game script, I like the under in this game. I know money is going towards the over, and I think it's going to be close late. I also think the Ravens will want to slow things down and run the ball and chew up clock, which I think means more carries and more yardage for Gus Edwards. If you don't like that, how about anytime touchdown? That's -105. He has 7 touchdowns in his last 4 games, has scored a touchdown in 4 straight. So if you're saying, well, how do you like the under and also an anytime touchdown prop? Well, yeah, there can still be 42 points scored the under can hit, and the Ravens can score 3 touchdowns. And when they get close to the goal line, they feed Gus Edwards. So I really like what I've seen out of him in the prop market over the past few weeks. I think it continues tonight. Right now, if the season ended today, the Bengals would be right there on the bubble, on the outside looking in the playoff picture. Do you see a path for them to get to the postseason? It feels like they have to find a way, right?
Well, if they lose tonight, you could cross off the AFC North title. I mean, just do the math. Mm-hmm. At that point, they'd be 3 games behind Baltimore, and they would have lost both head-to-head matchups. So, that's the tiebreaker. You're essentially 4 games back with 7 games to go. It's not going to work. Look, the thing about tonight's game that if you look at the standings, it starts to really matter is the Bengals have 1 AFC win. They have 5 wins, 4 of them against NFC opponents, which is great when you beat those teams. But you start thinking about tiebreakers. You're going to need victories in the AFC. If you lose tonight, you're 1-5 against AFC opponents. You're in a very tough, difficult division. Obviously the Browns have taken a big hit with Deshaun Watson, but for all of the Bengals' accomplishments over the last couple of years, and as much as they went into last week having won 5 out of 6, they're staring up at 3 teams. If you lose this week, you're going to be staring up even more at 2 of them because Cleveland and Pittsburgh play. 5-5, it gets pretty dicey. Right now, there are 11 teams in the AFC who have at least 5 wins, and some of those teams this weekend are going to increase that total to 6. Cincinnati still has to play Pittsburgh twice, which is not going to be easy. They have a home game against the Browns, who have had their number in recent years. They have to go to Kansas City. Minnesota's going to come here. Suddenly, that game is much more difficult than it looked like it was going to be at the beginning of the season. At 5-5, look, the Bengals have been a terrific second-half team over the last couple of years, meaning the second half of the season. They won their last 8 regular season games last year. They were 5-4 before winning the division title 2 years ago. But that's fine. You start to do the math at 5-5. You start to look at the rest of the AFC. You start to look at the schedule, and it gets difficult. This is as close to a must-win as I think you could have. And remember, the idea for the team this year wasn't to sneak into the playoffs and call it a successful season. The idea this year was to win the Super Bowl after coming so close 2 years ago and after coming so close to making it last year. At 5-5, understanding that your AFC North title hopes are basically gone. If you lose tonight, it really does feel like you could kiss that goodbye. Now, on the flip side, you win. Suddenly you're a game behind Baltimore. It's going to feel like game on. Cleveland does have a major injury issue with its quarterback. Pittsburgh's the worst 6-3 team I've ever seen. The way that this game is going to just, I feel like, change not so much the trajectory of the season, but how we talk about their hopes moving forward. It's absolutely massive.
At what point does the line move too much for you? Because I think that's my initial thought. And I did grab the Steelers +3 before that line moved. As soon as they tweeted that out, I ran, didn't walk to my sportsbook app. And I was like, all right, Steelers +3. Because clearly the line has shifted a lot. But at what point does the line move too much? Clearly a quarterback is a big part of the scenario, but it's not like Deshaun Watson was doing the greatest job at quarterbacking. So one could probably argue that the level of replacement would not be that big of a gap. Yes, between fourth quarter Deshaun Watson that we saw last game and Dorian Thompson-Robinson would be a big change. But still, the level of play we've seen from Deshaun Watson has not been that great this year. And the defense for the Browns is still pretty solid. So just playing the other side here, at what point does this line move and you say, okay, the value's all gone, now I'm off of it?
That's a very good point. With this game in particular, you have to be careful when a line moves this much. There's no question about it. But for this game, because I like the Steelers to win outright, it's not going to bother me as much. And also, one thing I think is interesting that you can't really quantify is what sort of effect will this have on the Browns mentally? Like, will they come out? They're going to play hard, and every team in the NFL does. But there's no question that when you're in the thick of your division race, right, you're coming off a huge win against the Ravens, and then all of a sudden your starting quarterback is out for the season, and you're not even going to your backup. You're going to a guy who is even less proven. And in that second half against the Ravens, Deshaun Watson, ironically, went 14 of 14. Looked like, okay, maybe he's finding his footing here. Maybe it's finally coming together for him in Cleveland. Now he's done. So you have to wonder, as a team, do the Browns come out maybe a little less motivated because they know their chances of winning the division and making the playoffs just took a serious hit? I think that's a possibility.
I think you have to be careful with motivation in the NFL because you got to think about the guys on the field. And we've seen it from teams that are quote unquote tanking. Remember the Arizona Cardinals to start the year? They were a feisty underdog, and it wasn't the motivation. It's just they didn't have the talent. But the guys on the field are playing for a job. They're playing for contracts. So I think you got to be careful in that scenario.